Hello, everybody, and welcome to this, well, semi-delayed episode of Top Deck Thoughts. Okay, let's just get this out of the way. Usually, I like to record my top 10 video for sets like before or right during when a set releases, and that was the plan for Modern Horizons 3. I even had it all recorded, but as my editor can probably show you with one of my pre-recorded clips,
Also, Lev, I don't think these, videos have sound. I could be wrong, but from what I'm seeing, I'm not seeing any sound. Yeah, I'm not seeing any sound. So yeah, not sure if you've got the audio for me, but that would be much appreciative.
I did one teensy little mistake, which is, I recorded all that muted. Yeah, that was an oops. That was a big oops. So yeah, for all the content creator friends out there and people who make things to entertain people, make sure to check all your recording settings and such, because I did that a little too quick and I accidentally forgot to check my mic, so that was an oops. Nevertheless, let's actually talk about my top 10 favorite cards of Modern Horizons 3. Now, for those who don't know, Modern Horizons 3 is usually a supplemental set where the basic Catch-22 premise is it skips standard but goes straight into the modern format. Usually these sets are crafted with a lot of love, there's a lot of good callbacks, a lot of returning mechanics that's really hard to return to, and even just some experimental mechanics. I mean, heck, we even have a card in here that has Grandeur of all things, which I never thought we were going to see that time spiral mechanic again. But still, just a great love letter, great callbacks, great designs, and just really powerful cards that can affect a lot of formats. So, yeah, let's get to that. But first, Honorary Mention. Let's just go get the easy one out of the way. The Honorary Mention is obviously the reprints in the set. Mostly the one that probably people will focus on right off the bat is the Fetch Lands, mostly because the enemy colored Fetch Lands were the cycle that we still needed to get a reprint of, all the way since from Khans of Tarkir. Great that we got this reprint. These are very highly desired lands, sees play in multiple formats, primary and commander, for a lot of reasons, primarily because they can fetch specific land types of the land that they're fetching with, which can tutor out for specific lands with have specific synergies or even just more color fits. But there also is just some other non-land reprints that are just very powerful in this set. I mean, the one that people will probably note right off the bat is the Yawgmoth's Tomb one, which, yeah, Soul Ring mana is pretty good in Modern. We're gonna get to that one in a minute. With one specific new card. But also there's just a lot of cool new cards, like, for example, Buried Alive is in Modern now, and also now in the Timeless and Historic format. And a lot of people are having fun with Buried Alive, specifically the variation Storm decks, where you just bury alive free Arc-like Phoenixes, and you caca away with all the spells and just swing in with your birds. So yeah, a lot of great reprints. I would say check all of them out just to see, kind of like have some fun tinkering with them, and just playing within the arena format as well as just the modern format. Nevertheless, though, let's get started with the top 10 list. Shall we?
Number 10.
Number 10 on this list, and this one's going to be an honorary list where we're going to have a bunch of cards on this slot, but really it's the whole MDFC land cycle. These lands are always very powerful, and we got a lot of really good ones this time around, both in the monocolored slot as well as the dual-colored slot that helps with the limited format. But also, these lands are just very popular in Commander. It's always nice to have a land slot that can also be a spell later in the game. The one that's primary, the most popular one of the bunch at the moment, is probably the Sunken in Stupor, I believe is the name of it. The editor's going to show it right here. But essentially, it's the blue bounce spell that's also can be a land. But there's some really good ones. Like, there's one that protects your creature and gives it Death Touch. There's even one that allows you to exile cards from your opponent's, essentially, library to play them. There's a lot of really good ones, so I would recommend checking all of this cycle out and to see if there's one that could cater to both being a nifty land within your deck design, but also with a nifty land within your quote-unquote archetype, so to speak, that you're brewing around. Nevertheless, of course, let's be honest, pretty much the Charbelcher decks are looking at these lands and being like, yes. Or the not all spells, essentially the not lands deck that just wins with the Balustrade Spy, pretty much win condition. So yeah, nevertheless, number 10 on my list, all the MDFC lands, because they tend to be pretty good. Number 9 on this list, and this one is going to be a little bit of a group one, but I will designate one card for it, but if we have to summarize it, it's Elrazi. There's a lot of really powerful Elrazi coming in this set. There's just good ways to help you ramp up your Elrazi. There's an Elrazi that's an Impact Trimmers. There's even an Elrazi with Richard Kane Ferguson art, which actually looks pretty dope and is actually a pretty solid limited card. But also, the return of the Free Titans as new Mythic cards in this cycle. Now, the most powerful one of the bunch is probably being Ulamog, mostly because that cast trigger as well as when it enters the battlefield trigger is ridiculously absurd, and having a scalable Annihilator is... Ugh. But if I had to say what one of my personal favorite ones of the bunch is, it has to be Emrakul, the World Anew. This one is just... I mean, first of all, it's a big, massive yoink spell, which is kind of hilarious. It also has one of the more absurd protection clauses that I have seen on a card. Like, this is a card that is really hard to remove with targeted removal. Let's just be blunt with that. There's, like, very fringe targeted removal spells that can actually cast it, and they have to be kind of like the classic. You first put it in as a permanent first, as well as then essentially then later in the game you can activate it to quote-unquote destroy a target creature. I'm talking about stuff that's kind of like has a semi-seal effect, essentially. But also, there is the factor that you can be cheeky, and if you have a way to copy a destroy target creature spell, technically a copy is not cast, so you can destroy Emrakul with that. So you kind of see what I mean, how it's really tricky to essentially target it. But the thing that makes me kind of happy with this card, and it's just such good flavor, it has a Madness cost, which, for those of you who don't know, one of my favorite Magic the Gathering mechanics is Madness. I had literally brewed around the mechanic within the Shadows of Innistrad block. I even tried to make a Legacy deck with it, with, of all things, the 2-drop Tibble. The original 2-drop Tibble. Yeah, the bad one.
Why?
And yeah, let's say I got my butt whooped when I played that Legacy deck, but I still had a blast with it. And it's just fun to have this new Madness challenge where it's like, okay, I now need to make a Madness deck where I have to get 6 colorless, and specifically colorless mana, not like generic mana, it has to be 6 colorless, and then just essentially be able to cast it. So that's going to be one of my first brews, that's going to be a deck, and oh, it's just going to be so fun to steal opponent's stuff, hopefully by turn 6, or maybe even earlier or later. Let's see. Now, number 8 on this list, and this one's kind of a no-brainer, it's the free spell cycle, aka the flare cycle in this set. All these cards are relatively pretty decent to actually pretty good spells on their own, and the fact that as long as you sacrifice a creature of the same color, you can cast it for free, ridiculously absurd. Probably the best being of the bunch is probably the blue one that's a counterspell, essentially, that you can cast for free. Merfolk decks in the Timeless format are having a heyday with this card, and also will have a chance in other formats without a sweat. My personal favorite, though, is probably the red one of the cycle. The red flare is actually really good. As we learn, having essentially a free copy spell can be pretty silly in the right circumstances, so don't sleep on that one. But yeah, probably the second best one is also Flare Cultivation, because yeah, Arbor Grazer, you're going to do some ramping shenanigans with that without a sweat. I will also say the other flares, like the Flare of Malice, is relatively decent. Sure, it's technically a Soul Shatter that you can cast for free. It's not the most exciting feat in the world, but you're playing in black. Black has a lot of stuff that they can sacrifice easily to this that is non-token, that it's black, that's easy to cast, so get a free Edict spell. And then also the other flare, relatively, probably the worst of the bunch, technically speaking, but it is still a relatively good card, and you are going to have some moments where you're going to win games with it. Actually, I think that white one did win with the recent Command Knights episode, actually now coming to think of it. Well, sorry for the spoilers, but I'm pretty much presuming you already watched that, if you were watching this. Nevertheless, the number 8 spot on the slot has to be the free spells without a sweat.
Number 7.
Number 7, we are actually technically going back to the Elrazi, at least by name. Also, the fact that it is kind of good in an Elrazi deck, but this card also had to be on the list as well. It has to be Kozilek's Unsealing. Now, this is obviously a clever callback to Sarkhan's Unsealing with the cast trigger effect of essentially, if you do 4 or 5 sits, you get this, but if you cast it 7 or higher spell, you get that. But this one is actually ridiculously absurd because it's actually one of the best decks that are going to run this card is not Eldrazi, of all things. It's Affinity. Affinity actually does like this card quite a bit, with how many stuff that they have that essentially is high mana value that then gets discounted due to how Affinity works in general, essentially. So, yeah, those spot monitors that you play are now going to, as well as draw you 2 cards, it's now going to draw you another 3 cards with the cast trigger. And heck, even getting a little Scions if you cast like a Frogmite for a discount and such is not the worst thing in the world, so yeah, there's going to be some shenanigans with this card, and of course it's going to see Commander play, because if you're pretty much the Eldrazi deck, or if you are any Stompy deck that has blue in their mana pool, pretty much cast big Ed spell, and then draw 3 additional cards, sign me up. No Sweateroni to the pepperoni. That number 7 is Kozilek's Unsealing.
Number 6.
Number 6 on this list has to be, well, Sits. Yes, I am the type of guy that will put Sits in the number 6 slot for the pun alone. But still, Sits is also just a ridiculously strong card in general. Being able to have Mulch on an attack trigger is really good. There is also the factor that essentially giving your non-land permanent spells from your graveyard retrace is a ridiculously strong ability. Don't sleep on that ability. That ability is going to help you a lot of more times than you think. There's just a lot of decks that can take advantage of this. Landfall style decks can take advantage of this. Also, any decks that essentially has a reanimator sub-strategy. Love the middle aspect of this card. Nevertheless, though, I think this Treefolk is going to see a lot more play than the typical Treefolk deck. Pretty much anything that runs a bunch of non-land permanents and also doesn't mind ramping with some lands are going to like Sits quite a lot. Number 5 on this list, and we gotta talk about a really good Merfolk that's coming in this set that's going to affect some formats, and that's gotta be the Harbinger of the Seas. Basically, everybody is calling this what you expected, other than Blood Moon effect for islands. It's either called Blood Moon, Blue Moon, whatever you want to call it. It's just a ridiculously solid card to just play in Merfolk decks in general, just being able to make everybody's non-basic lands into islands. Very good. It's going to be tricky in Modern to play this card, but in Timeless, this card's probably not going to be that hard to play. I have already seen a pretty good Timeless brew that plays this card. But yeah, I think any Merfolk deck is just going to give this a shot, or any land hate deck in general. So yeah, Blood Moon, pretty good on a Merfolk, it turns out. Who would have thought?
Number 4.
Number 4 on this slot, and I think this one can be easily summarized with playing the following song.
Oh, well, everybody's heard about the bird. The bird's a winner.
So yeah, number 4 is obviously Nadu. Nadu is probably what's been speculated, at least from the first week of play, being one of the most busted cards. It is a ridiculously strong card. Just giving your creatures the Coiling Oracle trigger when they get targeted by an ability, whether you control it or your opponents control, ridiculously absurd, especially with equipment shenanigans. Like, it's even seen test in Hammer Time of all things, because the fact that you have Pure Steel Paladin, make your equip cost 0. Oh, hey, play the bird, equip all your stuff multiple times to also just essentially get multiple coin and oracle triggers. Ridiculously absurd. It's also seen play in Historic and Timeless, because the fact is we do have this 2-drop alchemy card that essentially gives you equipments and also discounts your equipment costs. I'll show it on the screen here and such. I'm getting the name right off the top of my brain. But yeah, this card is ridiculously absurd. It might be the whole gag of the set. We're gonna give it time to see how the meta responds to it. But yeah, the bird is quite frankly the word with Nadu. And that's why it is on the number 4 slot of this list. Number 3 on this slot, this one I'm going to actually give an honorary mention to all the flip planeswalkers in the set. This one was kind of the sleeper of the set for a lot of people. We thought these cards were really clever callback designs and such, but we didn't really know how well they're going to do. But thanks to the first week of the meta, we kind of realized that all these planeswalkers are relatively really good. Specifically, a tie between Johnny as well as Tamio, but I think the winner of this list slot has to be Ral. Ral turns out to be a ridiculously good card in Storm, because the fact that, well, okay, we gotta explain a little bit of context here with this, why Ral's making this slot here. Now, of course, Ral is technically a Goblin Electromancer, of course. Technically, hey, an Izzet card that is also the Izzet guild leader in the future. Clever! But primarily the main reason why Ral is getting the popularity is because it's seen a popularity in a week 1 deck called Ruby Storm. Specifically because it's a combination with it as well as Ruby Medallion, which got reprinted, thanks to those reprints I mentioned in my honorary mention. And yeah, you play it in the Storm deck, you cast a ton of spells, and due to the way how Ral's backside Planeswalker side works, that it can enter with any loyalty depending on how many instant and sorcery spells you cast, you see where this is going. So you do your usual Storm shenanigans, Storm, inevitably flip Ral when you win a coin flip with how many spells you cast, and then you activate that ultimate to cast more spells to then inevitably win with whatever your win condition is within Storm, which, it's Storm. They have a lot of ways to win the game. So yeah, number 3 in this slot, technically it's all the flip planeswalkers, but the one that is the star of the show at the moment has to be Ral, which, kind of a pleasant surprise, not gonna lie. I remember a lot of people kind of was a little bit down on this card until they realized, hey, Goblin Electromancer with extra features is actually pretty good. Like, we probably should have learned that lesson with Baral, of all things, actually, now come to think of it.
Number 2.
Number 2 on this list, and this one is kind of a no-brainer. It has to be Ugin's Labyrinth. Ugin's Labyrinth is essentially, if you brew your deck right, which there are a lot of decks that can brew this with this right, is essentially a Soul Ring mana land that you can play really early in the game, turn 1, 2, free, etc. So yeah, Soul Ring on a land, as we learned in older formats, tend to be very, 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 very good. Now, yes, this, due to the way of how this essentially is, quote-unquote, balanced, the fact that it costs you a card to essentially throw into the land that protects it from hand hate, which then also then, if you feel bad about essentially losing that card, oh, you can just tap the land and get it back once you have enough mana to cast it. Yeah, Ugin's Labyrinth is just a ridiculous card, and there's a reason why it's on the number 2 slot.
Number 1.
Okay, number 1. This one is going to be a little bit awkward because I have to tell a story. And it's kind of interesting because number 1 originally was going to be Primal Prayers for me originally. The whole energy cycle, which, to be fair, WotC designed a whole energy cycle that's essentially more or less reserved list cards, a majority of them are, that get redesigned with an energy touch to it. Primarily the factor that Primal Players was an Alluring and such that had the energy mechanic attached to it. Ridiculously strong card. if you needed an honorary mention that's not the reprint, essentially, I would say that would probably be another honorary mention. That whole cycle of cards, ridiculously strong. So, originally that was going to be my number 1 card. But, like I said, there was the delay. And I actually have a new favorite card from the set that I think is number 1. And this one, we're going to get trippy. The frog. Worship the frog. Forfeit all possessions to the frog. It caused so much of my madness. Oh, hail the mighty frog! The contribution that is also a callback to Psychoton! The frog! Ribbit! Okay, now that I tripped out there for a minute, obviously my number 1 card is Psychic Frog. Turns out this card is kind of the sleeper of the set for me, because, context, my upcoming deck tech video is going to be a Gritz's Madness deck. I'm also debating about making a Dimir, honestly, for the historic format. And I was having a hard time because my main goal was, like I said, one of my other favorite cards in the set was Emrakul. So I was like, okay, I need to find a way to get a good way to essentially be able to discard cards to essentially help activate Madness. There's always the classic ones that you usually play in this archetype, like the 1-drop Vampire that you sacrifice and discard a card and draw a card that came from essentially the Chalice of Innistrad block. But I was like, I need a really good creature that can also allow me to discard cards and maybe even draw some more cards, and you see where this is going. Turns out Psychic Frog is really good in Madness of all things. Just because you can discard the Madness, also the combat damage trigger to either a Planeswalker or a creature, being able to draw a card is very good. And the activated ability to exile free cards from your graveyard to give a creature flying, very good, especially if you're running cards like Act of Assault Cauldron, so you can give Psychic Frog abilities to other creatures. Yeah. It turns out also this card is seeing a lot of play in even older formats because the fact that it works with Murktide Region brews and all that. Seen play in Dimir Control. It turns out the frog is really good. And it was a sleeper for me, but honestly now it's kind of my number 1 card of the set, mostly because, I mean, it allows me to play with one of my favorite mechanics, which is Madness. And, you know, we all had to have a little madness from a card once in a while. And for this one, my number 1 card of the set has got to be, without a doubt, the Psychic Frog. All hail the Psychic Frog. Anyway, nevertheless, that is my top 10 cards of Modern Horizons free. What are your personal favorites? Now, I hope you all have a good day. If by the time that this comes out, I'm probably in the middle of reviewing the Assassin's Creed cards, which, wait, didn't Assassin's Creed with a spin-off on Netflix have, like, an Assassin's Creed frog? Okay, I'm gonna need some painkillers after that hangover.